Hey there, people out in podcast land. We're about to get started. I just wanted to check to make sure everything is working the way that it should properly. I'm checking my levels. Everything looks pretty good. So I think we're ready to begin. It's just going to be me tonight. So we'll get into that in a second. But here we go. Hey there, podcast listeners, and welcome to the Principled Uncertainty Podcast. I am your host, Tyler, and joining me tonight is Tyler. It's just going to be me tonight. So, the week of Thanksgiving, it is a cold and dreary night here in Nashville, Tennessee. So, it's just going to be me talking tonight. So, pull up a chair, get comfy, get out your pecan pie and your sweet potato pie and whatever other kinds of pies you have during Thanksgiving, turkey pie. And don't forget to go follow us on Twitter at PU Podcast and find us elsewhere. Just the Principled Uncertainty Podcast. Email us at principledu@gmail.com. Otherwise, we're out there. If you're into streaming, then we're on Ustream. Just search for Principled Uncertainty Podcast there as well. So it's just going to be me tonight, and it's going to be kind of a quick episode because everyone is fleeing town. There are cars everywhere. Nashville is packed with people trying to get out. They're desperately trying to flee the city. So as am I. But I wanted to sit down and talk to you guys for a little while. So tonight I'm going to get into a few things that I've been playing, namely Far Cry 4. Talking about a little bit of Far Cry 4. I'll be talking a little bit of Alien Isolation. That's another game I've been playing. And maybe, I don't know if I'm feeling it, but I might be talking a little bit about Evil Within because that game's sort of fallen by the wayside as far as like all the games I've been playing recently. But I'm definitely going to be talking about some games. I might be talking about books. People used to read those things, so I might talk a little bit about those. Thanks for the feedback on last week's episode about me talking about my novel, Boogie House, which is available on Amazon for pre-order. Plug over. Just go to Amazon and search for Boogie House, like people boogieing. And it's there. It'll be available December 13th, 2014. So 12, 13, 14. Love for you to go pre-order the book. That would be pretty amazing if you would do that. But otherwise, it's going to be all about games. And books, maybe. So we'll see where the night takes us. But yeah, the first thing I want to talk about, hot off the presses, the first thing that pops into my mind is that I played a little bit of Far Cry 4. I won't say that I played a lot of it, but I definitely started digging into Far Cry 4. So that's something that needs be talked about. I actually was thinking about doing just a quick thoughts. Far Cry 4 just put something like 10 minutes out. Here's what I think, but I played several hours of it between yesterday and today, and so I decided I thought I'd talk about it a lot. So my initial impression of Far Cry 4 is that it is a lot like Far Cry 3. For those of you who played Far Cry 3 and absolutely loved it, Far Cry 4 is more of the very exact same thing. I mean, it plays the same. It kind of has the same arc. You could see them using a lot of the same narrative devices, just in different ways in different locations. But it's a good game. Like, you shoot stuff, you skin stuff, you can fly around, you can take over towers and shoot like quasi-ethnic bad guys wearing masks. And that's kind of the game. It's almost no different than Far Cry 3 in that respect. I mean, it's people wandering around saying weird stuff and you stealthily or not so stealthily running in and killing every single one of them. And that's just scratching the surface of this game. You're going to fly around and grab loot, and instead of trucks, you'll be riding a lot of ATVs, even though you have trucks in this game too. And it's Far Cry. Like, it's more of It's more Far Cry. I really liked those games. I thought that, I was kind of hitting a weird patch with as far as like video games go, because I wasn't really digging Alien Isolation. I wasn't really digging Evil Within, and I like Borderlands, but it felt kind of stale because it's a lot of the same kind of stuff. So I was afraid that I would get Far Cry 4 and feel just burned out on gaming in general, but I'm really digging it. I'm going to talk about some of my impressions as far as like what's good about it and how it uses some of the same tropes that it did before. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, Ubisoft is it has turned into sort of like an open world mill, kind of like a puppy mill, but for video games. So when you think about how this game is set up, you can think about a lot of how it is just sort of... They've had 2 years to work on this game because the other one came out in 2012. So it's not... They've had time to refine it and do some cool things, but it's still basically the same game. I mean, you start out with a young person who is in a somewhat foreign land, doesn't know the landscape, and then gets marauded by a group of locals, and we get to see the big bad early on. He's a very like flamboyant and memorable character from the very first scene, and it's like has this sort of jokey approach to kind of like a Bond villain is at the end of a Bond movie, except this is the very beginning. So you get an early impression of like who this bad guy is, and the bad guys, for better, like Voss and Pagan Min, the ostensible bad guy of Far Cry 4. Who knows if it'll play out that way, just like in Far Cry 3. You get that sort of beginning, like that intro is almost exactly the same. Like there is more gravity to it this time around. I think what they took from Ubisoft and the team that made the Far Cry 3 in this one, they seem to have taken the criticism of the third one as being overtly sort of like racist and having this sense that like a white savior mentality. And hold on, I'm gonna have to sneeze. Okay, it went away. The white savior mentality that is ever present in Far Cry 3 and sort of pernicious, I think, is not really as much a part of Far Cry 4. However, it does rely on the sense of someone who is not a local coming in and taking things over, like this powerful person who is not a local, being able to save the local people. And that sort of still has a weird vibe to it, but otherwise it's kind of not a Far Cry game. So I understand why it's done that way. At least it's not a kind of soulless white kid on vacation who ends up saving all of humanity on this island, and the nation of Kyrat is kind of a cool Himalayan place, but what else they do very similarly here is that they set up a resistance that seems to me to be in very plain view of everything. Like, it doesn't seem as though the Golden Path is that hidden or like that hard to find, and Pagan Min doesn't seem like someone to suffer the existence of any sort of rebellion at all. So the idea that this village would manage to exist at all whatsoever is kind of weird, just as in the third one. So that's weird, but it's very similar. Like in the third game, you have this home base that is just there, that just exists, and that's where the rebellion is, and the la resistance. And so Far Cry 4 has the exact same thing. Like if you imagine it in Far Cry 3, it is also in Far Cry 4. The map for Far Cry 4 is super expansive. I mean, it is gigantic. So one of my favorite parts of Far Cry 4 is just exploring the world. I mean, I don't care for the missions I don't think the missions are that interesting because they're just basic open world missions. A lot of it is drive this thing to this place, deliver it, and then drive back. And a lot of it is timed sort of arbitrarily. And like that's okay. That's as far as game stuff goes, I'm used to that, but it's not breaking ground as far as like mission types go. That's not what makes it fun. The fun is in the exploration and like taking things on your own and just sort of hunting animals and driving around and doing all this crazy like emergent stuff within the world to bring that word out of the grave. That's really what makes a Far Cry game Far Cry to me is just all the things you can just do for no reason. And like it's a storytelling kind of game. Like it's the sort of stuff where you can tell stories about it. And one of my favorite missions so far in Far Cry 4 that I don't remember was in Far Cry 3 is that in Far Cry 4 there's a mission fairly early on where you go into a camp and try to say, and this isn't going to spoil anything. I mean, this is just a mission type, but the pagan's minions, kidnap people, and you are there to save a certain number of them before they are murdered. And if you get caught, then you have to sort of like shoot your way into the camp and save them and then get out, very Rambo-like. And that mission type is very cool. I like that kind of mission rather than just like overtake this camp. Those kinds of missions I got bored with in Far Cry towards the end of Far Cry 3. But here it's pretty welcome, and I really like those kinds of missions. So it's neat. As far as like structure goes, it's still very much in line with the third game. You arrive, you are told like you're the one. Like there's still sort of like a Neo from the Matrix aspect of Far Cry 4 that was also kind of present in Far Cry 3 for no discernible reason. And I don't know why that has to be the case, but I guess that's just part of the narrative structure of the game, and it sort of foists on the character like this. How are you going, like these people are used to fighting and you're just someone who is a visitor, sort of an interloper, and now you're the one. And it's kind of tedious as far as like a narrative construct goes, but it's still not a bad video game element. And this one has a little bit more gravity than 3 does. 3 was just sort of a happenstance, like, oh, hey, we're like Tarista's kind of the ruins, to borrow some really awesome references from the mid 2000s. That sort of thing was sort of overdone. And not to great effect. Like parts of Far Cry 3 made me feel really uncomfortable, especially towards the end. But here so far it makes sense. I keep thinking about it. I keep thinking about how, if you're going to like the race element, and like this is also, I don't mean to get political here too much with Far Cry 4, but the element of, and this is sort of a geopolitical game. Like it's sort of meant to be something that takes place in a fictional world, but is also kind of taking from elements of sort of like ripped from the headlines kind of stuff about governments being toppled by these ridiculous dictators and that sort of thing. So this is not that, like, Ubisoft cannot shield itself from this kind of criticism, but on the heels of the Ferguson decision last night, the element of race really interests me as far as Far Cry 4 goes, because it's a game where more than most games, even Far Cry 3, I can't say that because it's not true, but at least with the Far Cry games, they attempt to show it's not just like white people doing stuff. And it's weird because, like, it's the kind of game that, say, Resident Evil 5 was labeled as racist because the first thing you do is go into an African village and shoot Africans. And that criticism is not, like, that is valid criticism. But at the same time, a lot of video games require shooting things. And, like, if you're going to move the landscape of something, even within the construct of these like very violent FPS games, then you have to sort of like move the area and environment that people live in and fight in and that sort of thing. So like to that extent, I think Far Cry 4 is progressive in a way. I mean, it is weird that you go to a foreign country and this is marketed, to Americans. And it is weird that you go to a foreign country and just shoot people. And it's not like I haven't really played the Call of Duty games, but I imagine that's what you do a lot too. Like you go into countries because you are a military guy, you're not shooting Americans, so ostensibly you're shooting people from other countries. So like I think that's something, but also here it seems to have a sense of like where it's taking place. I don't know much about the peaks of. I mean, this is ostensibly the area around Everest. I think I could be wrong about that, but I don't see anything totally culturally insensitive about this as far as how it's portraying who it is portraying. It seems to be pretty sensitive to like what those people like what the struggle is, and even if it kind of whitewashes it a little, it's not. I think it's definitely a step in a direction. I don't know if it's the right direction. Like in thinking about this as I talk, it makes me think of Disney's Aladdin as well, which is not. That wasn't cool, even though it tried to portray like a vaguely Middle Eastern like idea of the world. It also was really insensitive to the peoples there. Having the opening song say something about, hey, you could get beheaded, but hey, it's home sort of stuff. And, having white actors portray and, having them only look vaguely ethnic. I mean, Disney was taking a step, but also not taking a step simultaneously. So I could see people leveling that same criticism at Far Cry 4, but ultimately the sort of like geopolitical statement it's making comes second to just the gameplay element and like what's going on. But I also don't think that is a way of sidestepping the real criticism of like what the game is about. So, I mean, that remains to be seen. And I could see people being really upset about it, but it's not quite what people thought when they first saw the announcement poster, which is on if you're watching the Ustream, the poster is up next to my head, like on this side. I always want to do the other side because it's mirrored, but the original image it looked like a white guy forcing, someone from another country to kneel before him on the rubble of a country. And that upset a lot of people, understandably. The fact that that's not really what's going on sort of is not. I mean, Pagan Min is blonde, but he's also from the country of Karat. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, I think I've said sort of all I want to say about it, but video games still have a long way to go, but it seems like the people are trying to make it like, I don't see in 20 years people saying Far Cry 4 was so progressive, but at the same time, it's different from just what else is out there. I'd rather have a game like Far Cry 4 than something that is totally inept and like harbors these like old ideas about just game design. Like as far as, oh, here's another game about zombies, here you go. Like no thought about what's putting, like even Resident Evil 5 is provocative in that way, even if it's sort of it seems like a misstep. Like it's thinking about, like it's a very Japanese way of thinking about stuff. So it's weird for them to have that criticism, but still, it's marketed a lot to American audiences. So I have to say that I really dug Far Cry 4 so far. I rented it, haven't bought it yet, but I'm definitely going to buy it. I think that's a must-play game. Especially, I mean, if you like the third one, this is more of that. And every other year seems like a good amount of time to play a Far Cry game. And like I was listening to the Giant Bombcast, and they said like this is the last time they can get away with making this game. I don't know. I mean, if they change the setting and do some interesting things with it every single time, then I could be okay with it. Like this time around, the way that they use throwing bait, these are going to be small iterations. This is not like, oh my God, but mechanically it feels great. Like it looks a lot better. The map seems to be bigger. Shooting feels great. The weapons look awesome. Like the user interface looks cool. And so I think like I'm okay with all of that. So if they in another couple of years are like, here's Far Cry 5 and it takes place in another pseudo tropical location with a really like bad guy, I mean I'd be okay with it, I think. I mean, if it's a bad game, that's different. But if it's another version of this, I can handle that. Just like if Borderlands continues to make good versions of their games, I'm okay with that. Like, I don't think it necessarily needs to be an annualized series. I mean, I think that's what's killing Assassin's Creed right now, which I don't play those games, but they are not getting good press right now, and that's also Ubisoft. But I don't think it should be annualized, but every other year, every 3 years, a Far Cry game would be kind of neat, I think. I mean, I will play another Grand Theft Auto. If and when they make Grand Theft Auto 6, I'm going to play it. It should be a couple years down the road, but I'm still going to play it. So those are my initial impressions. I mean, it's fun in the ways that games can be fun and ridiculous. It plays really well. It is totally refined from the third game. I don't think this is janky. I'm playing the PS3 version, and I thought that Far Cry 3 on the Xbox was kind of broken in some ways. Like some of the things that happened were just janky, and the frame rate issues and pop in. And Far Cry 4 runs great. I mean, I think it's a good game. So I think people should buy it. So that's just me. I'm going to buy it. I just rented it so that I could have something to say, because I have all these other games on my plate, so I didn't want to buy a game and also have 3 games out that I'm still sort of like chugging through. So I love it. I think it's pretty awesome. So I'm going to move on to Alien Isolation just briefly. Excuse me. Which is kind of different. It's still slow. It's still frustrating. Like, I don't mind restarting things in Far Cry 4 because the sort of loop of dying and coming back is way more tolerable than Alien Isolation. Alien Isolation has some long ass loading times, and I don't know what it's like on the PC and the new generation, the current generation of consoles, but previous gen, it's just long and bad. And on the PS3, the frame rate issues are awful. The game does some pretty bad chugging, and like I got slow down, especially in parts where I need to get away from stuff, like the alien or other survivors. That's not good. Like that's not something I want to play. So I'm still liking it, and I didn't like the first few hours of it, but I think I've made my peace with the things I don't like about it. So what I do like are driving me to keep playing it, and I'm gonna finish it unless it gets so tedious that I can't finish it. So until I don't finish it, I'm going to finish it, if that makes any sense. What makes it a good game so far for me is that it's really tense, and it's one of those games where it's almost old school, not just in the way that you have to save and sometimes you have to restart saves, and it's really difficult, but you almost have to memorize a path. And that's kind of interesting and different. Instead of just sort of like hurling yourself against the wall until you get it right by happenstance, you kind of have to come at it with a method here, which is kind of neat, because I'm in a particular section of the game where not only do I have to avoid the alien, which has become a prominent fixture in the game at this point, in a really cool way. It's really good. But I also have to avoid looters and survivors and other people who are just sort of like wandering around the ship, and having to sort of play one off the other as sort of like a go-between, an interloper, to use that phrase again. That's kind of interesting, and that makes the game, I think, really playable. My big criticism about Alien Isolation so far is that I spend a lot of time waiting. Not just on the loading screens. I spend a lot of time waiting on the alien to leave, waiting on looters to leave, like jumping. What makes it not fun is going from hiding place to hiding place and then stopping, waiting for extended periods of time, and then sometimes arbitrarily getting like ripped out of my locker or whatever and being murdered. That's tedious and that's not fun. What is fun is being able to sneak around. What's not fun is just waiting. Because there are times in the game when you'll be waiting in a locker and you'll pull up your sort of situational your device that tells you where the alien is, how far away it is, and the alien's not going away. The alien is staying put or coming closer or moving away a few feet and then coming closer again. So you just sort of wait. And that's totally not fun. That's not even tense. That's not horrific. It's horrific if you're out and about and you hear the little boop that lets you know that the alien is coming closer and then you have to scramble for a hiding place. That is tense. That is scary. That's the sort of thing that reviewers latched onto when they talked about something about the game being scary. That's the thing that they should have been talking about. That's the thing that makes that game. What doesn't make it is scrambling to a hiding place and then waiting there for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, or scrambling to another one and waiting again. It's kind of the gaming equivalent of jumping from island to island and just waiting. Go, okay, the shark's gone by. I'm gonna go. That's not that fun, and that's not that interesting either. That's not something to talk about. That doesn't make discussion. What does make discussion is I've found that playing the alien off of the looters and the survivors, that is interesting. That's fun. Using the noisemakers to lure the alien to the survivors, having the alien kill them so that I can make it past a certain point. That's where the game really stands out. But it's very obvious when something is scripted in this game, and it takes away from the unknown factor. I mean, there's a point where you escape part of the ship and you have to avoid some places where the alien's waiting on you. And you can tell because the acid is dripping through the ceiling. So that's almost scripted every time because I died a lot. It being scripted did not make it any less difficult for me. So I died a lot when it came to maneuvering the sport. This is the part where you have to sort of memorize what you're going to do. And that's fine too, but what is not fun about that section is if you die, you have to start over a lot and the saves take so long to load. And then if you mess up one little portion, you kind of have to start over unless you are constantly save scumming in a way where you're just do a little portion of it, go back and save. That's not fun either. That's not something that I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to sort of make it through the sections. Maybe I'm just not good at the game. That is also a possibility. I might just not be very good at Alien Isolation, but that game's tough. And so dying a lot either is a lot of fun for you or not. And there's so many good games right now. I don't want to wait on air. I don't want to wait in the locker the whole time. And I wonder if is the 20 or so hours that everyone says this game takes, is that including all the time you just sort of sit in lockers, or is that actual gameplay time? I'm curious. I'm going to be curious to know because I don't want to do that for another 12, 15 hours. I feel like that's a waste of my time. So I'm going to end up playing Alien Isolation until I don't like it anymore. And then I'm going to stop. I'm not going to just push through just to have pushed through. I mean, I don't have to review this game, so I can just play it until it's not fun, and then I'm going to move on to other games that are good. I will move on to Far Cry 4 and put a lot of time into that game. So I'll talk briefly about The Evil Within, and I only put another hour or so into it, but it's still not doing it for me. I think it's a game though I'm going to hang on to and just sort of play intermittently until I'm done with it. I don't feel like I need to just burn through that game so I can finish it. I think it's just going to be play it in sips. I'm going to play it the way that a lot of people will play Dragon Age, which I'm probably not going to play. I'm just going to play it in sips over the course of the month or the next 2 months and be done with it by the end of the year. But play a checkpoint, put it down, because with Far Cry, I found myself wanting to just keep playing, and I got into that loop of, oh man, now I finished this. I want to go to the next thing. Like, what is the next thing that I want to do? And that's the key a lot of times to a good game. But Evil Within, want to put it down. Alien Isolation, wanted to put it down. Like, I would play 30 minutes of Alien Isolation and I'd want to put it down. Like, oh, I don't want to do this again. Or I've hit a checkpoint, I'm going to stop. Like, I want to stop. It's kind of like if you write a book and people stop. Like, if you don't write a book so that people want to turn the page to the next chapter, where they're just okay, I'm done with my part, I'm just going to put it down now, finish the chapter. Like, that's not the key to it. Like, you want to write a book that people want to keep reading. And I think video games are even more that way, that it's like you should end a section or a checkpoint with momentum to the next point. There should not be a barrier to that, because at any point where someone is tempted to put the game down, they might just not pick it back up, especially when there are so many good games out there. So I feel like Evil Within, it's so segmented, and there are so many weird sections to that game that feel like different kinds of games, that it's easy to put down. I mean, there are portions where it feels like a shooter. There are portions where it feels like a survival horror game. There are portions where it's a stealth game. There are portions where it's like, and which is, I mean, that's more interesting than if it were just a single slog of a game. Like, oh, this is too monotonous. I think that's not what we're looking for. Like, we're not looking for a single kind of experience. We being all gamers, so I'm speaking for all gamers right now, but the single game experience is not what everyone's looking for. It's variety of experience, but it also needs to be something that feels cohesive, and the parts of this just sometimes feel just thrown together. Or just like, oh, here's the kind of sequence we're going to place here. Like, you're going to be trapped here and shoot things. It's a very outmoded and outdated kind of game development strategy. Like, being caught in an insane asylum and just shooting people for 20 minutes because they're attacking you. Like, and maybe part of that is because I don't really understand what the narrative through line to the Evil Within is supposed to be. It doesn't, if the game had set itself up as like, you have to have all these different kinds of experiences, or like, here are the different kinds of experiences you are going to have, I think I'd be more game with it. Sorry for that, not pun, but choice of language, but like, if the game had set itself up like, here are all the things you're gonna have to do, like GTA, you're gonna have to do a lot of stuff, or like Saints Row, you're gonna have to do a lot of different kinds of stuff to be able to complete it, and it kind of lets you know that in a narrative way, or in just in the way that it sets up the world. I don't feel like the Evil Within does that. It just sort of like throws you into this kind of, I mean, it's kind of like a Clive Barker novel, but told through some like insane filter. And for part of it, I'm okay with that. Like, there are parts where I'm like, okay, I get this. And then it changes and I'm like, but I was just having fun with this other thing. Why does it have to be this now? Like, why does it have to be a shooter right now? The other thing is, the scarcity of bullets is okay as a sort of like means for keeping people tense. But if you're going to throw a dozen enemies at somebody, you should have enough bullets to kill those people. That's not fun. It may be tense, but it's not fun. And like, the two can be mutually exclusive, but there needs to be some overlap. And maybe I need more bullets and need to be better at the game. But I feel like just taking ammo away or not having it and throwing a bunch of enemies, like, that's not what I'm looking for in a game. I'm more than willing to follow this kind of game through, and I think I'd like it a lot more if the shooter parts were more full of bullets. Like, if there were certain parts, there are definitely sections of the game where you need to shoot people in the Evil Within, and I'd totally be okay with it if you were given enough bullets. Like, here's a definite shooter section. Like in Far Cry 4, when you're going to have to shoot a lot of people, they just give you a gun and you shoot like unlimited bullets. Like, it's a rail sequence, but it's still like, here's a bunch of bullets. But in the Evil Within, it still constricts that element of gameplay. So you're just like given the same amount of bullets, but given way more enemies to shoot. And it's really frustrating. And I personally cannot stand that. I just do not like the tedium of that kind of gameplay element. And I hate it. So I'm not going to play that. So I'm going to keep playing The Evil Within, but I think I'm going to play it sort of like as it comes. Like, here's a section. I'm going to play whatever the section is. I'm going to put it down. Okay, I'll pick it back up. That's what it's going to be like. So, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily even a bad game either. It's not aggressively bad. It's just weird and disjointed and not totally cohesive. It's also not that scary. It's not that tense. Alien Isolation is tense. Evil Within is gory. But it doesn't even seem to... like, it takes itself so seriously. And it has... even though it is a lot of game... in upwards of 20 hours, it feels like it's very light on narrative. It feels like it's very light on story. And I'd be way more invested in this game if it had more story or more something going on. If it was more of a journey through the psychoses of this Detective Castellanos or whatever, then that would be interesting. Like if there was a story here, if there was a Bioshock level story here, or I mean, just any kind of story, like any kind of involved story. But then the narrative elements that are there are kind of lopsided towards the bad. I mean, there's some story, but it's more about like the psychology of this one character, but it's not, I don't get enough like of what's going on elsewhere. And there's not enough to read or something, or characters tell you what's going on. Like when you talk to characters, usually it's just, oh, here's the thing we need to kill. Oh, I need to unlock this door. And that's not going to carry this game throughout. And maybe that's a Japanese style of making this sort of game. I mean, I've played a lot of Resident Evil. And Fatal Frame, but all of those have some sort of like narrative through line. So I feel like it's just not, it doesn't have its own voice, maybe, is the way that I want to say that. So, Evil Within, I'm going to keep playing it. I mean, Far Cry 4 is definitely one of my favorite games of the year so far. But it's also kind of cheap because it is a game that I've also just really liked anyway, so that's kind of unfair. But I'm having fun with games. I am not as tired of them as I thought, so I was afraid that, with the 1-2 punch of Alien Isolation kind of being not fun in the beginning and Evil Within being kind of a clunker, that I was like over video games for now. But I'm not, because Far Cry 4 is hilarious fun. And I'm also really digging Borderlands, although I haven't put a lot of time into it. It's still fun and full of guns and silly as shit. So I think that's it. I almost made 40 minutes. So 45 minutes is a usual podcast episode. So I'll do a recommendation and then I'll get out of there. My recommendation is going to be the novel Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. Or Gillian Flynn? Gillian. Like Gillian Jacobs, right? I don't know. Dark Places is her second novel before Gone Girl. And it is totally messed up and a really great murder mystery. It feels kind of like a more filled out Chuck Palahniuk book mixed with something else. I don't know. It's really good. I don't know. I think that there's probably a lot of blowback based on people either not liking Gone Girl or not liking the ending of Gone Girl, either the book or the movie. But Dark Places, I think, might be superior to Gone Girl. I definitely like it better than Sharp Objects, her first book. And I might like it better than Gone Girl, but it's a definite read. I listen to the audiobook, so I would say pick it up on Audible. That's a plug for Audible. I've listened to a lot recently on Audible. They have a lot of good stuff. They're not a sponsor, but I use them a lot. So I'm going to say, check out Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. And check out our podcast. Just find us on the internet and follow us on Twitter at PU Podcast. Email us at principledu@gmail.com. Search for us on Ustream. We have a Facebook page. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast. That will super help. So otherwise, thanks for stopping in. And I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Principled Uncertainty Podcast. Bye now. So now that the podcast is over, I can just chat. This is live streaming on Ustream, so if anyone is Ustreaming right now, I haven't looked at the feed, but if anyone's on Ustream right now, I can just sort of talk to the camera a little bit. As a post-show, this is the overtime with Bill Maher section. I'm trying to fight off a sickness, so that's why my throat's kind of scratchy, but I was still fighting it off last week too, so just it's just the fall and winter. As far as other games, I haven't really been playing anything. I've been reading a lot of books about serial killers lately, so I didn't bring it up in the podcast because I didn't feel like I could work it in a normal way. And like the thing that weirds me out the most about serial killers, other than the murder and sexual hang-ups and stuff, is like the book I'm reading right now is called The Night Stalker, and it's about the Night Stalker. It's about Richard Ramirez, who was a serial killer in the 80s in California, and devil worshiper, like all of those weird things, like drew pentagrams on people's bodies and on his hand during trial. He's like, besides Charles Manson, probably the scariest murderer / cult leader ever. And like the thing that bothers me is like for the book is good. Like it's well written, and usually true crime fiction is kind of smutty or bad. I just finished Zodiac by Robert Graysmith, and that's really good because it was written by a guy who was working for the San Francisco Chronicle, I believe, and so he was involved in the case. It's tangentially, but this one's not, but it's still really well written. But the author, I think his name it's not Philip Carlo, but it's not something entirely off the mark there either. What's weird about it is that it has pictures. Like true crime books almost always have pictures in them, like here is the killer at trial, and here's the killer, like here's a scene, I don't know, like here's a murder scene, crime scene. But the author's picture for the book is the author standing with Richard Ramirez, which I think is I think that's messed up. Like I think that takes the element of writing about serial killers one step too far. Like it's one thing to be interested in it and write about it, but it's quite another to be like, here's the guy, here he is, like here's Richard Ramirez. Like he doesn't have his arm around him, and he looks very serious, but at the same time his author photo is him standing with a serial killer. And I don't know if that's meant to be like, here is me, like being like I definitely know about the case because I talked to the killer, and here's me with him. But it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't give it any more credibility to me. So of course I am a guy who's reading a book about serial killers, so there's that. But I think I think all that stuff's really interesting. I don't know why. I think it's just I've always been drawn to it, so I've always read about it. I grew up in an era of serial killers and an era of serial killer, like movies about serial killers. I mean, Silence of the Lambs, Jennifer 8, Seven, all of those movies dealt with serial killers, and they're some of my favorite movies. I also grew up watching things like the Jeffrey Dahmer trial, watching the movie Body Parts. So I was acutely aware of all of this stuff as a kid because it was all like the villain of America over the last 10 years has been, quote unquote, the terrorist. Like that has been the villain for the last 15 years. But when I was growing up, the overall villain was like the serial killer, the person next door, the killer who lives near me kind of stuff. Like who is a serial killer? And so that's sort of something that dates back to the 80s, like Stranger Danger and all of that. So I don't know, like it's good. I mean, it's a 600-page book about the night. Holy shit, I just lost it. The Night Stalker. I almost said the Night Strangler. Two of the cops on the Night Stalker case worked the Hillside Strangler case, Bianchi and Buono. Also, the movie Copycat was a really great movie about serial killers, starring Sigourney Weaver. Yeah, I don't know. Dermot Mulroney. So anyway, yeah, serial killers. It's weird. Like I want to talk. I'd like to have someone on who's like, I'd love to interview someone who writes about serial killers. So if you're a true crime author and would like to talk about serial killers with me, I would be interested in doing that. Otherwise, I think that I've hit 45 minutes. So I think I'm going to call it a night here on the Principled Uncertainty podcast. This has been fun. Streaming is awesome. I'm looking at, you can see, see that? That's a hole in the wall. Hopefully back there's going to be a poster sometime soon. I'm just going to have something back there. I'm going to start decorating this room so it doesn't just look like my padded cell. But anyway, thanks for listening to the Principled Uncertainty podcast. This has been episode 191, which I meant to say at the beginning. But that's it. And look for it. It should go up tonight or tomorrow. And it will definitely be up by Friday. So thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time. Bye.